Mitakuye, I say. Hello, all my relations. How y'all doing? My name is the Lucky Coyote, and today we are going to be reading some more Brothers Grimm. Today was actually pretty damn good. I enjoyed today. I made a couple of mistakes at work, just measuring and layout mistakes, but they got quickly fixed. It was just a little frustrating, but it worked out well enough. So, and it's the weekend. Yay! Hope y'all enjoy the weekend. Later on, I might play some more Marvel Rivals because I got to get back to Platinum. Although I don't know if I should do it online or not, or on stream or not. Because I apparently have 50-50 shots while streaming. Whereas with off stream, I tend to do better for some reason. I don't know why. Hi, Suzu. Love you. All right. Well, let's get to her. Forgot that. That's not the title. All right. Good luck. Thanks. This first title is entitled The Godfather. The Godfather by the Brothers Grimm. A certain poor man had so many children that he had already asked all the world and his wife to stand godfathers and godmothers to them. And when yet another child was born, he knew not where to find anyone to ask. In a great perplexity, he went to sleep and dreamed that he could go out of his door and ask the first person he met to be godfather. As soon as he awoke the next morning, he resolved to follow out his dream. So he went out and asked the first person he met. This was a man who gave him a little glass of water, saying, "This is a miraculous water, with which you can restore the sick to health. Only you must observe where the disease lies. If it is near the head, give the patient some of the water, and he will become well again. But if it is near the feet, all your labor will be in vain. The sick person must die." The man was now able to say at any time whether such an one would recover, and though through this ability he became famous and earned much money. Once he was summoned to the child of the king, and as soon as he entered, he saw the disease was situated near the head, and so he healed it with the water. This happened a second time also. But at the third time, the malady affected the feet, and he knew at once the child would die. Not long after this event, the man determined to visit the godfather and tell him all his adventures with the water. But when he came to the house, behold, most wonderful doings were going on within. On the first stair were a dustpan and a broom, quarreling and beating one another, and he asked them where the master lived. The broom replied, "A stair higher." On the second stair he saw a number of fingers lying, and he asked them where the master lived. One of the fingers replied, "A stair higher." On the third stair lay a heap of bowls, who showed him up a stair higher yet. And on this fourth stair he found some fish frying themselves in a pan over the fire, who told him to go a stair higher yet. When he had mounted his fifth stair, he came to a room and peeped through the keyhole of the door, and saw the godfather there with a pair of long horns on. As soon as the poor man opened the door and went in, the godfather got very quickly into a bed and covered himself up. Then the man said, "Ah, Mr. Godfather, what wonderful doings are these I see in your house? When I mounted the first stair, there was a broom and a dustpan quarreling and beating one another." "How very simple you are," replied the godfather. "They were my boy and maid talking to one another." "But on the second stair I saw some fingers lying." "Why, how absurd you are," said the other. "Those were roots of plants." "But on the third stair I found a heap of bowls," said the man. "Why, you silly fellow," replied the godfather, "those were cabbages." "But on the fourth stair I saw fish frying themselves in a pan." And as the man spoke, the fish came and served up themselves on a dish. "And when I mounted the fifth stair, I peeped through the keyhole of a door, and there I saw you, O godfather, and you wore 2 very long horns." "Holla, that is not true!" exclaimed the godfather, which so frightened the man that he ran straight off, or nobody knows what the godfather would have done to him. Thus ends The Godfather. Apparently he had an offer they couldn't refuse. This next story is entitled The Godfather, Death. So let us begin. The Godfather, Death, by the Brothers Grimm. A certain poor man had 12 children and was obliged to work day and night to find them bread to eat. But when the 13th child was born, he ran out in his despair on the high road to ask the first he should meet to stand godfather to it. Presently he met Death, striding along on his withered legs, who said, "Take me for godfather." The man asked him who he was, and received for reply, "I am Death, who make all things equal." "Then," answered the man, "you are the right person. You make no difference between the rich and poor. You shall be godfather for my boy." Death replied, "I will make your child rich and famous. He who has me for a friend can need naught." Then the man told him the christening was fixed for the following Sunday, and invited him to come. And at the right time he did appear, and acted very becomingly on the occasion. When the boy arrived at years of discretion, the godfather came and took him away with him, and leading him to a forest, showed him an herb which grew there. "Now," said Death, "you shall receive your christening gift. I make you a famous physician. Every time you are called to a sick person, I will appear to you. If I stand at the head of your patient, you may speak confidently that you can restore him. And if you give him a morsel of that vegetable, he will speedily get well. But if I stand at the feet of the sick, he is mine, and you must say all medicine is in vain, for the best physician of the world could not cure him. Dare not, however, use the herb against my will, for then it will go ill with you." In a very short space of time, the youth became the most renowned physician in the world. "He only wants just to see the sick person, and he knows instantly whether he will live or die," said everyone to his neighbor. And so it came to pass. that from far and near people came to him, bringing him the sick, and giving him so much money that he soon became a very rich man. Once it happened that the king fell sick, and our physician was called in to say if recovery were possible. When he came to the bedside, he saw Death stood at the feet of the king. "Ah," thought he, "if I might this once cheat Death, he will certainly take offense. But then I am his godchild, and perhaps he will shut his eyes to it. I will venture." So saying, he took up the sick man and turned him around so that Death stood at the head of the king. Then he gave the king some of the herb, and he instantly rose up quite refreshed. Soon afterwards, Death, making an evil and gloomy face, came to the physician and pressed him on the arm, saying, "You have put my light out, but this time I will excuse you, because you are my godchild. However, do not dare to act so again, for it will cost you your life, and I shall come and take you away." Soon after this event, the daughter of the king fell into a serious illness, and as she was his only child, he wept day and night until his eyes were almost blinded. He also caused to be made known that whoever saved her life should receive her for a bride and inherit his crown. When the physician came to the bedside of the sick, he perceived Death at her feet, and he remembered the warning of his godfather. But the great beauty of the princess and the fortune which her husband would receive so influenced him that he cast all other thoughts to the wind. He would not see that Death cast angry looks at him and threatened him with his fist. But he raised up his patient and laid her head where her feet had been. Then he gave her a portion of the wonderful herb, and soon her cheeks regained their color, and her blood circulated freely. When Death thus saw his kingdom a second time invaded, and his power mocked, he strode up swiftly to the side of the physician, and said, "Now it is your turn. Come." And he struck him with his icy cold hand so hard that the physician was unable to resist, and was obliged to follow Death to his underground abode. There the physician saw thousands upon thousands of lamps burning in immeasurable rows, some large, others small, and others yet smaller. Every moment some were extinguished, but others in the same instant blazed out, so that the flames appeared to dance up here and there in continual variation. "Do you see?" said Death. "These are the lamps of men's lives. The larger ones belong to children, the next to those in the flower of their age, and the smallest to the aged and grey-headed. Yet some of the lamps and youth in the world have but the smallest lamps." The physician begged to be shown his own lamp, and Death pointed to one almost expiring, saying, "There, that is thine." "Ah, my dear godfather," exclaimed the physician, frightened, "kindle a new one for me. For your love of me do it, that I may enjoy some years of my life, marry the princess, and come to the crown." "I cannot," answered Death. "One lamp must be extinguished before another can be lighted." "Then place the old one over a new lamp, "That is dying. Fire may kindle a fresh blaze," said the physician entreatingly. Death made as if he would perform his wish, and prepared a large and fresh lamp, but he did it very slowly in order to revenge himself, and the little flame died before he finished. Then the physician sank to the earth and fell forever into the hands of death. Thus ends The Godfather, Death. This next one is entitled The Golden Bird. Actually, I should turn off the sound for the alerts, so you can see the alerts but not hear them in case they come in the middle of the story. Don't want the stories being interrupted. The Golden Bird by the Brothers Grimm. A long, long while ago, there was a king who had, adjoining his palace, a fine pleasure garden in which stood a tree which bore golden apples, and as soon as the apples were ripe they were counted, but the next day one was missed. This vexed the king very much, and he ordered that watch should be kept every night beneath the tree, and having 3 sons, he sent the eldest, when evening set in, into the garden. But about midnight the youth fell into a deep sleep, and in the morning another apple was missing. The next night the second son had to watch, but he also fared no better, for about midnight he fell fast asleep, and another apple was wanting in the morning. The turn was come now to the third son, who was eager to go, but the king hesitated for a long time, thinking he would be even less wakeful than his brothers. But at last he consented. The youth lay down under the tree and watched steadily, without letting sleep be his master. And, just as 12 o'clock struck, something rustled in the air, and, looking up, he saw a bird flying by whose feathers were of bright gold. The bird lighted upon the tree, and had just picked off one of the apples when the youth shot a bolt at it, which did not prevent its flying away, but one of its golden feathers dropped off. The youth took the feather up, and, showing it the next morning to the king, told him what he had seen during the night. Thereupon the king assembled his council, and everyone declared that a single feather like this was worth a kingdom. "Well, then," said the king, "if this feather is so costly, I must and will have the whole bird, for one feather is of no use to me." The eldest son was now sent out on his travels, and, relying on his own prudence, he doubted not that he should find the golden bird. When he had walked about a mile, he saw, sitting at the edge of the forest, a fox, at which he levelled his gun, but it cried out, "Do not shoot me, and I will give you a piece of good advice. You are now on the road to the Golden Bird, and this evening you will come into a village where 2 inns stand opposite to each other. One will be brightly lit up, and much merriment will be going on inside. But turn not in there. Enter rather into the other, though it seems a poor place to you." The young man, however, thought to himself, "How can such a silly beast give me rational advice?" And, Going nearer, he shot at the fox, but he missed, and the fox ran away with its tail in the air. After this adventure he walked on, and towards evening came to the village where stood the two public houses, in one of which singing and dancing was going on, while the other looked very ill-conditioned house. "I should be a simpleton," said he to himself, "if I were to go into this dirty inn where that capital one stood opposite." So he entered the dancing-room, and there, living in feasting and rioting, he forgot the golden bird, his father, and all good manners. As time passed by, and the eldest son did not return home, the second son also set out on his travels to seek the golden bird. The fox met him as it had his brother, and gave him good counsel, which he did not follow. He likewise arrived at the two inns, and out of the window of the riotous house his brother leaned and invited him in. He could not resist, and entered, and lived there only to gratify his pleasures. Again a long time elapsed with no news of either brother, and the youngest son wished to go and try his luck, but his father would not consent. "It is useless," said he. "You are still less likely than your brothers to find the golden bird, and if a misfortune should happen to you, you cannot help yourself, for you are not very quick." The king, at last, however, was forced to consent, for he had no rest while he refused. On the edge of the forest, the fox was again sitting, and again he offered in return for his life the same piece of good advice. The youth was good-hearted, and said, "Be not afraid, little fox. I will do you no harm." "You shall not repent of your goodness," replied the fox, "but that you may travel quicker, get up behind on my tail." Scarcely has he seated himself, when away they went, over stones and sticks, so fast that his hair whistled in the wind. As soon as they arrived at the village, the youth dismounted, and following the advice he had received, turned, without looking round, into the mean-looking house, where he passed the night comfortably. The next morning, when he went into the fields, he found the fox already there, who said, "I will tell you what further you must do. Go straight forwards, and you will come to a castle before which a whole troop of soldiers will be sleeping and snoring. Be not frightened at them, but go right through the middle of the troop into the castle, and through all the rooms till you come into a chamber where a golden bird hangs in a wooden cage. Nearby stands an empty golden cage for show, but take care you do not take the bird out of its ugly cage, or place it in the golden one, or you will fare badly." With these words, the fox again stretched out its tail, and the king's son, riding as before, away they went over the sticks and stones, till their hair whistled in the wind from the pace they travelled at. When they arrived at the castle, the youth found everything as the fox had said. He soon discovered the room where the golden bird sat in its wooden cage, and by it stood the golden one, and 3 golden apples were lying around. The youth thought it would be a pity to take the bird in such an ugly and dirty cage, and opening the door, he put it in the splendid one. At the moment he did this, the bird set up a piercing shriek, which woke the soldiers, who started up and made him a prisoner. The next morning he was brought to trial, and when he confessed all, he was condemned to death. Still the king said he would spare his life under one condition, namely, if he brought to him the golden horse which travelled faster than the wind, and then for a reward he should also receive the golden bird. The young prince walked out, sighing and sorrowful, for where was he to find the golden horse? All at once he saw his old friend the fox, who said, "There, you see what has happened, because you did not mind what I said. But be of good courage. I will protect you and tell you where you may find the horse. You must follow this road straight till you come to a castle. In the stable, there this horse stands. Before the door, a boy will lie fast asleep and snoring. So you must lead away the horse quietly. But there is one thing you must mind. Put on his back the old saddle of wood and leather, and not the golden one which hangs close by. For if you do, it will be very unlucky." So saying, the fox stretched out his tail, and again they went as fast as the wind. Everything was as the fox had said, and the youth went into the stall where the golden horse was. But as he was about to put on the dirty saddle, he thought it would be a shame if he did not put on such a fine animal, the saddle which appeared to belong to him. And so he took up the golden saddle. Scarcely had it touched the back of the horse when it set up a loud neigh, which awoke the stable boys, who put our hero into confinement. The next morning he was condemned to death, but the king promised to give him his life and the horse if he would bring the beautiful daughter of the king of the golden castle. With a heavy heart the youth set out, and by great good fortune soon met the fox. "I should have left you in misfortune," said he, "but I felt compassion for you, and am willing once more to help you out of your trouble. Your road to the palace lies straight before you, and when you arrive there, about evening, wait till night, when the princess goes to take a bath. And as soon as she enters the bathhouse, do you spring up and give her a kiss, and she will follow you wheresoever you will. Only take care that she does not take leave of her parents first, or all will be lost." With these words the fox again stretched out his tail, and the king's son seating himself thereon, away they went over stone and stick like the wind. When they arrived at the golden palace, the youth found everything as the fox had foretold, and he waited till midnight, when everybody was in a deep sleep. And at that hour the beautiful princess went to her bath, and he sprang up instantly and kissed her. The princess said she was willing to go with him, but begged him earnestly, with tears in her eyes, to permit her first to take leave of her parents. At first he withstood her prayers, but when she wept still more, and even fell at his feet, he at last consented. Scarcely had the maiden stepped up to her father's bedside when he awoke, and all the others who were asleep awakening too. The poor youth was captured and put in prison. The next morning the king said to him, "Thy life is forfeited, and thou canst only find mercy if thou clearest away the mountain which lies before my window, and over which I cannot see. But thou must remove it within 8 days. If thou accomplish this, then thou shalt have my daughter as a reward." The king's son at once began digging and shoveling away. But when, after 7 days, he saw how little was effected, and that all his work went for nothing, he fell into a great grief, and gave up all hope. But on the evening of the 7th day, the fox appeared and said, "You do not deserve that I should notice you again, but go away and sleep while I work for you." When he awoke the next morning and looked out of the window, the hill had disappeared, and he hastened to the king full of joy and told him the conditions were fulfilled. And now, whether he liked it or not, the king was obliged to keep his word and give up his daughter. Away then went these two together, and no long time had passed before they met the faithful fox. "You have the best, certainly," said he, "but to the maid of the golden castle belongs also the golden horse." "How shall I obtain it?" inquired the youth. "That I will tell you," answered the fox. "First take to the king who sent you to the golden castle the beautiful princess. Then there will be unheard of joy, and they will readily give you the golden horse and lead you to it. Do you mount it, and then give your hand to each for a parting shake. At last of all to the princess, whom you must keep tight hold of, and pull her up behind you. And as soon as that is done, ride off, and no one can pursue you, for the horse goes as fast as the wind." All this was happily accomplished, and the king's son led away the beautiful princess in triumph on the golden horse. The fox did not remain behind, and said to the prince, "Now I will help you to the golden bird. When you come near the castle where it is, let the maiden get down, and I will take her into my cave. Then do you ride into the castle yard, and at the sight of you there will be such joy that they will readily give you the bird. And as soon as you hold the cage in your hand, ride back to us and fetch again the maiden." As soon as the deed was done, and the prince had ridden back with his treasure, the fox said, "Now you must reward me for my services." "What do you desire?" asked the youth. "When we come into yonder wood, shoot me dead, and cut off my head and feet." "That were a curious gratitude," said the prince. "I cannot possibly do that." "If you will not do it, I must leave you," replied the fox. "But before I depart, I will give you one piece of counsel. Beware of these 2 points. Buy no gallows flesh, and sit not on the brink of a spring." With these words it ran into the forest. The young prince thought, "Ah, that is a wonderful animal, with some curious fancies. Who would buy gallows flesh? And I don't see the pleasure of sitting on the brink of a spring." Onwards he rode with his beautiful companion, and by chance the way led him through the village where his 2 brothers had stopped. There he found a great uproar and lamentation, and when he asked the reason, he was told that 2 persons were about to be hanged. When he came near, he saw that they were his 2 brothers, who had done some villainous deeds, besides spending all their money. He inquired if they could not be freed, and was told by the people that he might buy them off if he would, but they were not worth his gold, and deserved nothing but hanging. Nevertheless, he did not hesitate, but paid down the money, and his 2 brothers were released. After this, they all 4 set out in company, and soon came to the forest where they had met the fox. And as it was cool and pleasant beneath the trees, for the sun was very hot, the 2 brothers said, "Come, let us rest a while here by the spring, and eat and drink." The youngest consented, forgetting in the heat of conversation the warning he had received, and feeling no anxiety. But all at once the brothers threw him backwards into the water, and taking the maiden, the horse, and the bird, went home to their father. "We bring you," said they to him, "not only the golden bird, but also the golden horse and the princess of the golden castle." At their arrival there was great joy, but the horse would not eat, the bird would not sing, and the maiden would not speak, but would cry bitterly. The youngest brother, however, was not dead. The spring, by great good luck, was dry, and he fell upon soft moss without any injury, but he could not get out again. Even in this necessity, the faithful fox did not leave him, but soon came up and scolded him for not following his advice. "Still I cannot forsake you," said he. "I will again help you into daylight. Hold fast upon my tail, and I will draw you up to the top." When this was done, the fox said, "You are not yet out of danger, for your brothers are not satisfied of your death, and have set watches all round the forest, who are to kill you if they should see you." The youth thereupon changed clothes with a poor old man who was sitting near, and in that guise went to the king's palace. Nobody knew him, but instantly the bird began to sing. The horse began to eat, and the beautiful maiden ceased weeping. Bewildered at this change, the king asked what it meant. "I know not," replied the maiden, "but I who was sad am now gay, for I feel as if my true husband were returned." Then she told him all that had happened, although the other brothers had threatened her with death if she disclosed anything. And the king summoned before him all the people who were in the castle, and among them came the poor youth, dressed as a beggar, in his rags, but the maiden knew him, and fell upon his neck. The wicked brothers were seized and tried, but the youngest married the princess, and succeeded to the king's inheritance. But what had happened to the poor fox? Long after, the prince once again went into the wood. The fox met him, and said, "You have now everything that you can desire, but to my misfortune there is no end, although it lies in your power to release me." And with tears he begged him to cut off his head and feet. At last he did so, and scarcely was it accomplished when the fox became a man, who was no other than the brother of the princess, delivered at length from the charm which had bound him. From that day to this nothing was ever wanting to the happiness of the hero of the Golden Bird. Thus ends The Golden Bird. This next story is entitled The Travels of Thumbling. Yeah, always follow advice from magical talking animals. If, they say, "Hey, in exchange for this, I'll do this for you." Okay. Especially if it's sparing their lives. Besides, you can totally make some money off of a talking animal. The Travels of Thumbling. by the brothers Grimm. A certain tailor had a son who was so very diminutive in stature that he went by the nickname of Thumbling. But the little fellow had a great deal of courage in his soul, and one day he said to his father, "I must and will travel a little." "You are very right, my son," replied his father. "Take a long darning needle with you and stick a lump of sealing wax on the end of it, and then you will have a sword to travel with." Now the tailor would eat once more with his son, and so he skipped into the kitchen to see what his wife had cooked for their last meal. It was just ready, however, and the dish stood upon the hearth, and he asked his wife what it was. "You can see for yourself," replied she. Just then Thumbling jumped on the fender and peeped into the pot, but, happening to stretch his neck too far over the edge of it, the smoke of the hot meat carried him up the chimney. For a little distance he rode on the smoke in the air, but at last he sank down on the earth. The little tailor was now embarked in the wide world, and went and engaged with a master in his trade. But with him the eating was not good, so Thumbling said to the mistress, "If you do not give us better food, I shall leave you, and early tomorrow morning write on your door with chalk, 'Too many potatoes, too little meat. Adieu, my Lord Potato King.'" "What do you think you will do, grasshopper?" replied the mistress. And in a passion she snatched up a piece of cloth, and would have given him a thrashing, but the little fellow crept nimbly under a thimble, and peeped out beneath at the mistress, and made faces at her. So she took up the thimble, and tried to catch him, but Thumbling skipped into the cloth, and as she threw it away to look for him, he slipped into the crevice of the table. "Hee hee hee, old mistress," laughed he, putting his head up, and when she would have hit him, he dropped down into the drawer beneath. At last, however, she did catch him, and hunted him out of the house. The little tailor wandered about till he came to a great forest, where he met a band of robbers who were going to steal the king's treasure. As soon as they saw the tailor, they thought to themselves, "Ah, such a little fellow as that can creep through the keyhole and serve as a picklock." "Hola!" cried one. "You Goliath, will you go with us to the treasure chamber? You can easily slip in and hand us out the gold and silver." Thumbling considered for a while, and at last consented, and went with them to the palace. There he looked all over the doors to see if there were any chinks, and presently discovered one which was just wide enough for him to get through. Just as he was about to creep in, one of the watchmen at the door saw him, and said to the other, "What ugly spider is that crawling there? I will crush it." "Oh, let the poor thing be," said the other. "He has done nothing to you." So Thumbling got luckily through the chink into the chamber, and, opening the window beneath which the robbers stood, threw out one by one the silver dollars. Just as the tailor was in the heat of his work, he heard the king coming to visit his treasure chamber, and in a great hurry he hid himself. The king observed that many dollars were gone, but he could not imagine who could have stolen them, for the locks and bolts were all fast, and everything appeared quite safe. So he went away again, and said to the watchman, "Have a care There is someone at my gold." Presently Thumbling began his work again, and the watchman heard the gold moving, chinking, and falling down with a ring. So they sprang in, and would have seized the thief. But the tailor, who when he heard them coming, was still quicker, and ran into a corner, and covered himself over with $1, so that nothing of him could be seen. Then he called to the watchman, "Here I am!" And they went up to the place, but before they could search, he was in another corner, crying, "Ha ha! Here I am!" The watchman turned there, but he was off again in a third corner, crying, "He! Here I am!" So it went on, Thumbling making fools of them each time, and they ran here and there so often about the chamber that at last they were wearied out and went away. Then he threw the $1 out as before, and when he came to the last, he gave it a tremendous jerk, and, jumping out after, flew down upon it to the ground. The robbers praised him very highly, saying, "You are a mighty hero. Will you be our captain?" Thumbling refused, as he wished first to see the world. So they shared the booty among them, but the little tailor took only a farthing, because he could not carry any more. After this deed, he buckled his sword again round his body, and, bidding the robbers good day, set out further on his travels. He went to several masters seeking work, but none of them would have him, and at last he engaged himself as a waiter at an inn. The maids, however, could not bear him, for he could see them without their seeing him, and he gave information to the master of what they took secretly from the larder, and how they helped themselves out of the cellar. So the servants determined among themselves to serve him out by playing some trick. Not long afterwards, one of them was mowing grass in the garden, and saw Thumbling skipping about from daisy to daisy. So she mowed down in a great hurry the grass where he was, and tying it in a bundle together, threw it slyly into the cow's stall. A great black cow instantly swallowed it up, and Thumbling too, without injuring him. But he was not at all pleased, for it was a very dark place, and no light to be seen at all. When the cow was being milked, Thumbling called out, "Holla! When will that pail be full?" But the noise of the running milk prevented his being heard. By and by the master came into the stable, and said, "This cow must be killed tomorrow." This speech made Thumbling tremble, and he shouted out in a shrill tone, "Let me out first, I say! Let me out!" The master heard him, but could not tell where the voice came from, and he asked, "Where are you?" "In the dark," replied Thumbling. But this the master could not understand, so he went away. The next morning the cow was killed. Happily, Thumbling escaped without a wound from all the cutting and carving, and was sent away in the sausage meat. As soon as the butcher began his work, he cried with all his might, "Don't chop too deep! Don't chop too deep!" But the whirring of the cleaver again prevented his being heard. Necessity is the mother of invention, and so Thumbling set his wits to work, and jumped so cleverly out between the cuts that he came off with a whole skin. He was not able to get away very far, but fell into the basin where the fragments were, and presently he was rolled up in a skin for a sausage. He found his quarters here very narrow, but afterwards, when he was hung up in the chimney to be smoked, The time appeared dreadfully long to him. At last, one day, he was taken down, for a guest was to be entertained with the sausage. When the good wife cut the sausage in half, he took care not to stretch out his neck too far, lest it should be cut through. Then, seizing his opportunity, he made a jump and sprang quite out. In this house, however, where things had gone so badly, the little tailor would not stop any longer, so he set out again on his travels. His liberty did not last very long. In the open fields he met a fox, who snapped him up in a twinkling. "Ah, Mr. Fox," called Thumbling, "I do not want to stick here in your throat. Let me out again." "You are quite right," replied the fox. "You are no use there, but if you will promise me all the hens in your father's farmyard, I will let you off scot-free." "With all my heart," said Thumbling. "You shall have all the fowls, I promise you." Then the fox let him out and carried him home. And as soon as the farmer saw his dear son again, he gave all the hens instantly to the fox as his promised reward. Thereupon Thumbling pulled out the farthing which he had earned upon his wanderings, and said, "See, I have brought home with me a beautiful piece of gold." "But why did they give the fox the poor little hens to gobble up?" "Why, you simpleton, don't you think your father would rather have his dear child than all the fowls in his farmyard?" Thus ends the travels of Thumbling. This next story is entitled The Feather Bird. As if birds don't already have feathers. The Feather Bird by the brothers Grimm. Once upon a time there lived a sorcerer who used to take the form of a beggar and go begging before the houses and stealing little girls, and nobody knew where he took them. One day he appeared before the house of a man who had 3 pretty daughters, as a poor, weak, old cripple, carrying a sack on his back to put all his alms in. He begged for something to eat, and when the eldest girl came out and offered him a piece of bread, he only touched her, and she was compelled to jump into his sack. Then he hurried away with great strides, and carried her through a dark forest to his house, in which everything was very splendid. There he gave her what she wished, and told her, "All will be well with you, for you will have all your heart can desire." This lasted 2 days, and then he said, "I must be off and leave you for a short time alone. These are the housekeeping keys. You can look over everything, but into one room, which this little key unlocks, I forbid you to enter, on pain of death." He also gave her an egg, saying, "Preserve this carefully for me, and always carry it about with you, for if it be lost, a great misfortune will happen." She took the key and the egg, and promised all he required. But as soon as he was gone, her curiosity overmastered her, and after she had looked over the whole house, from attic to cellar, she unlocked the forbidden door and went in. She was terribly frightened when she entered the room, for in the middle there stood a large basin full of blood, and and in it there were dead bodies, chopped in pieces. Beside the basin was a block of wood, and on it a gleaming axe. In her terror, the egg fell from her hand and rolled into the basin, and although she fished it out again directly and wiped it, it was of no use, for scrub and wash all she might, the blood appeared as fresh as ever. The next day the man came home and demanded the key and the egg. She handed them to him with trembling, and he instantly perceived that she had been into the forbidden chamber. "Have you then dared to enter that room against my will?" said he. "Then now you enter it again against yours. Your life is forfeited." So saying, he drew her in by the hair and cut off her head on the block. Her blood ran down on the floor. Then he chopped her up and threw her into the basin with the others. "Now I will fetch the second one," said the sorcerer to himself, and, assuming the disguise of a beggar, he went and begged before the house. Then the second girl brought him a piece of bread, and he seized her as the first and bore her away. It happened to her as it had to her elder sister. Curiosity led her astray. She opened the forbidden door, and on the sorcerer's return, paid with her life. He went now and fetched the third sister, but she was prudent and cunning. As soon as he had given her his directions and had ridden away, she at first carefully laid by the egg, and then went and opened the forbidden chamber. Ah, what a scene! She saw her two dear sisters lying there chopped in pieces, but she got to work and gathered the pieces and put them in their right place, head and body, arms and legs. When nothing was missing, the pieces began to move and knit together, and the two girls came alive again. They were very happy, and kissed and embraced one another. On his return, the sorcerer demanded the key and the egg, and when he could find no spot of blood on them, he said to the maiden, "You have withstood temptation. You shall be my bride, and whatever you desire, that will I do." "Very well," she replied. "Then first you must take my father and mother a sack full of gold, and you must carry it yourself on your back. In the meantime, I will arrange the wedding." Then she ran to her sisters, whom she had concealed in a chamber, and said, "The moment has arrived when I can save you. The sorcerer himself shall carry you away, and as soon as you arrive at our home, send me help." Then she placed them both in a sack and covered them over with gold, so that nothing of them could be seen. And then, calling the sorcerer in, she said, "Now carry away the sack, but I shall peep through my window and keep a sharp lookout that you do not rest at all on your journey." The sorcerer raised the sack on his shoulder and went away with it, but it weighed so heavily that the perspiration ran down his face. Presently he wished to rest a minute, but a voice called to him out of the sack. "I am looking through my window and see that you are stopping. Will you go on?" He thought it was his bride calling to him, so he instantly got up again. A little further he would have rested again, but the same voice called, "I am looking through my window and see you are stopping. Will you go on again?" And as often as he stopped, he heard the same words, and so he was obliged to keep on, until he at last arrived, exhausted and out of breath, with a sack of gold at the house of the father and mother. Meanwhile, at home, the bride prepared the wedding feast and invited the friends of the sorcerer to come. Then she took a skull, put a headdress on it and a crown of flowers, and set it at the topmost window, and left it there, peeping down. As soon as all was ready, she dipped herself in a cask full of honey, and then, ripping up the bed, she rolled herself among the feathers until she looked like a marvelous bird, whom no one could possibly recognize. After this she went out of the house, and on the way some of the wedding guests met her and asked her whence she came, and she replied, "I come from the house of the Feather King." "How does the young bride?" asked they. "She has taken herself to the top of the house and is peeping out of the window." Soon after, the bridegroom met her as he was slowly traveling back, and asked exactly the same questions as the others, and received the same answers. Then the bridegroom looked up and saw the decorated skull, and he thought it was his bride, and nodded to it, and kissed his hand lovingly. But just as he was gone into the house with his guests, the brothers and relations of the bride, who had been sent to her rescue, arrived. They immediately closed up all the doors of the house so that no one could escape, and then set fire to it, and the sorcerer and all his accomplices were burnt to ashes. Thus ends The Feather Bird. Pretty graphic. This next story is entitled The Six Swans. Hopefully a lot more pleasant than sorcerers murdering. So let us begin. The Six Swans by the Brothers Grimm. A king was once hunting in a large wood, and pursued his game so hotly that none of his courtiers could follow him. But when evening approached, he stopped, and looking around him, perceived that he had lost himself. He sought a path out of the forest, but could not find one, and presently he saw an old woman with a nodding head, who came up to him. "My good woman," said he to her, "can you not show me the way out of the forest?" "Oh, yes, my lord king," she replied. "I can do that very well, but upon one condition, which if you do not fulfill, you will never again get out of the wood, but will die of hunger." "What then is this condition?" asked the king. "I have a daughter," said the old woman, "who is as beautiful as any one of you can find in the whole world, and well deserves to be your bride. Now, if you will make her your queen, I will show you the way out of the wood." In the anxiety of his heart, the king consented, and the old woman led him to her cottage, where the daughter was sitting by a fire. She received the king as if she had expected him, and he saw at once that she was very beautiful, but yet she did not quite please him, for he could not look at her without a secret shuddering. However, after all, he took the maiden up on his horse, and the old woman showed him the way, and the king arrived safely at his palace, where the wedding was to be celebrated. The king had been married once before, and had 7 children by his first wife, 6 boys and a girl, whom he loved above everything else in the world. He became afraid, soon, that the stepmother might not treat them very well, and might even do them some great injury. So he took them away to a lonely castle, which stood in the midst of a forest. This castle was so hidden, and the way to it so difficult to discover, that he himself could not have found it if a wise woman had not given him a ball of cotton, which had the wonderful property, when he threw it before him, of unrolling itself and showing him the right path. The king went, however, so often to see his dear children that the queen noticed his absence, became inquisitive, and wished to know what he went to fetch out of the forest. So she gave his servants a great quantity of money, and they disclosed to her the secret, and also told her of the ball of cotton, which alone could show the way. She had now no peace until she discovered where this ball was concealed, and then she made some fine silken shirts, and, as she had learned from her mother, she sewed within each one a charm. One day soon after, when the king was gone out hunting, she took the little shirts and went into the forest, and the cotton showed her the path. The children, seeing someone coming in the distance, thought it was their dear father, and ran out towards her full of joy. Then she threw over each of them a shirt, which, as it touched their bodies, changed them into swans, which flew away over the forest. The queen then went home quite contented, and thought she was free of her stepchildren. But the little girl had not met her with her brothers, and the queen did not know of her. The following day the king went to visit his children, and he found only the maiden. "Where are your brothers?" asked he. "Ah, dear father," she replied, "they are gone away, and have left me alone." And she told him how she had looked out of the window and had seen them changed into swans, which had flown over the forest. And then she showed him the feathers which they had dropped in the courtyard, and which she had collected together. The king was much grieved, but he did not think that his wife could have done this wicked deed, and, as he feared the girl might also be stolen away, he took her with him. She was, however, so much afraid of the stepmother that she begged him not to stop more than one night in the castle. The poor maiden thought to herself, "This is no longer my place, and I will go and seek my brothers." And when night came, she escaped and went quite deep into the woods. She walked all night long and a great part of the next day, until she could go no further from weariness. Just then she saw a rude hut, and walking in she found a room with 6 little beds, but she dared not get into one, but crept under, and, lying herself upon the hard earth, prepared to pass the night there. Just as the sun was setting, she heard a rustling, and saw 6 white swans come flying in at the window. They settled on the ground and began blowing one another until they had blown all their feathers off, and their swans down stripped off like a shirt. Then the maiden knew them at once for her brothers, and gladly crept out from under the bed. and the brothers were not less glad to see their sister, but their joy was of short duration. "Here you must not stay," they said to her. "This is a robber's hiding place. If they should return and find you here, they will murder you." "Can you not protect me then?" inquired the sister. "No," they replied, "for we can only lay aside our swan's feathers for a quarter of an hour each evening, and for that time we retain our human form, but afterwards we resume our usual appearance." Their sister then asked them with tears, "Can you not be restored again?" "Oh no," replied they, "the conditions are too difficult. For 6 long years you must neither speak nor laugh, and during that time you must sew together for us 6 little shirts of star flowers. And should there fall a single word from your lips, then all your labor will be in vain." Just as the brother finished speaking, the quarter of an hour elapsed, and they all flew out of the window again like swans. The little sister, however, made a solemn resolution to rescue her brothers, or die in the attempt, and she left the cottage, and penetrating deep into the forest, passed the night amid the branches of a tree. The next morning she went out and collected the star flowers to sew together. She had no one to converse with, and as for laughing, she had no spirits. So there up in the tree she sat, intent only upon her work. After she had passed some time there, it happened that the king of the country was hunting in the forest, and his huntsmen came beneath the tree on which the maiden sat. They called to her and asked, "Who art thou?" But she gave no answer. "Come down to us," continued they. "We will do thee no harm." She simply shook her head, and, when they pressed her further with questions, she threw down to them her gold necklace, hoping therewith to satisfy them. They did not, however, leave her, and she threw down her girdle, but in vain, and even her rich dress did not make them desist. At last the hunter himself climbed the tree, and brought down the maiden, and took her before the king. The king asked her, "Who art thou? What dost thou upon that tree?" But she did not answer, and then he asked her, in all the languages that he knew, but she remained dumb to all, as a fish. Since, however, she was so beautiful, the king's heart was touched, and he conceived for her a strong affection. Then he put around her his cloak, and, placing her before him on his horse, took her to his castle. There he ordered rich clothing to be made for her, and although her beauty shone as the sunbeams, not a word escaped her. The king placed her by his side at the table, and there her dignified mien and manners so won upon him, and he said, "This maiden I will marry, and no other in the world." And after some days he was united to her. Now the king had a wicked stepmother who was discontented with his marriage, and spoke evil of the young queen. "Who knows whence the wench comes?" said she. "She who cannot speak is not worthy of a king." A year after, when the queen brought her firstborn son into the world, the old woman took him away, and she went to the king and complained that the queen was a murderess. The king, however, would not believe it, and suffered no one to do any injury to his wife, who sat composedly sewing at her shirts and paying attention to nothing else. When a second child was born, the false stepmother used the same deceit. The king again would not listen to her words, but said, "She is too pious and good to act so. Could she but speak and defend herself, her innocence would come to light." But when again the third time the old woman stole away the child, and then accused the queen, who answered her not a word to the accusation, the king was obliged to give her up to be tried, and she was condemned to suffer death by fire. When the time had elapsed, and the sentence was to be carried out, during which she had neither spoken nor laughed, it was the very day when her dear brothers should be made free. The 6 shirts were also ready, all but the last, which yet wanted the left sleeve. As she was led to the scaffold, she placed the shirts upon her arm, and just as she had mounted it, and the fire was about to be kindled, she looked round, and saw 6 swans come flying through the air. Her heart leapt for joy as she perceived her deliverers approaching, and soon the swans, flying towards her, alighted so near that she was enabled to throw over them the shirts, and as soon as she had done so, their feathers fell off, and the brothers stood up alive and well. But the youngest wanted his left arm, instead of which he had a swan's wing. They embraced and kissed each other, and the queen, going to the king, who was thunderstruck, began to say, "Now may I speak, my dear husband, and prove to you that I am innocent and falsely accused?" Then she told him how the wicked old woman had stolen away and hidden her 3 children. When she had concluded, the king was overcome with joy, and the wicked stepmother was led to the scaffold and bound to the stake and burnt to ashes. The king and queen forever after lived in peace and prosperity with their 6 brothers. Thus ends the 6 swans. This next one is a little famous. Briar Rose. I know in the movie Sleeping Beauty that was her name, but I don't know if this is that story. If this is the story of Sleeping Beauty, but we will find out. So let us begin. One moment. My water. Briar Rose by the brothers Grimm. In olden times there lived a king and queen who lamented day by day that they had no children, and yet never a one was born. One day, as the queen was bathing and thinking of her wishes, a frog skipped out of the water and said to her, "Your wish shall be fulfilled. Before a year passes, you shall have a daughter." As the frog had said, so it happened, and a little girl was born who was so beautiful that the king almost lost his senses. But he ordered a great feast to be held, and invited to it not only his relatives, friends, and acquaintances, but also all the wise women who are kind and affectionate to children. there happened to be 13 in his dominions, but since he had only 12 golden plates out of which they could eat, one had to stop at home. The fête was celebrated with all the magnificence possible, and as soon as it was over, the wise woman presented the infant with their wonderful gifts, one with virtue, another with beauty, a third with riches, and so on, so that the child had everything that is to be desired in the world. Just as 11 had given their presents, the 13th old lady stepped in suddenly. She was in a tremendous passion because she had not been invited, and without greeting or looking at anyone, she exclaimed loudly, "The princess shall prick herself with a spindle on her 15th birthday and die!" And without a word further, she turned her back and left the hall. All were terrified, but the 12th fairy, who had not yet given her wish, then stepped up, but before she could take away the evil wish, but because she could not take away the evil wish, but only soften it, she said, "She shall not die, but shall fall into a sleep of 100 years' duration." The king, who naturally wished to protect his child from this misfortune, issued a decree commanding that every spindle in the kingdom should be burnt. Meanwhile, all the gifts of the wise woman were fulfilled, and the maiden became so beautiful, gentle, virtuous, and clever, that everyone who saw her fell in love with her. It happened on the day when she was just 15 years old that the queen and the king were not at home, and so she was left alone in the castle. The maiden looked about in every place, going through all the rooms and chambers just as she pleased, until she came at last to an old tower. Up the narrow winding staircase she tripped until she arrived at a door, in the lock of which was a rusty key. This she turned, and the door sprang open, and there in the little room sat an old woman with a spindle spinning flax. "Good day, my good lady," said the princess. "What are you doing here?" "I am spinning," said the old woman, nodding her head. "What thing is that which twists round so merrily?" inquired the maiden, and she took the spindle to try her hand at spinning. Scarcely had she done so when the prophecy was fulfilled, for she pricked her finger at the very same moment she fell back upon a bed which stood near in a deep sleep. This sleep extended over the whole palace. The king and queen, who had just come in, fell asleep in the hall, and all the courtiers with them, the horses in the stables, the doves upon the eaves, the flies upon the walls, and even the fire upon the hearth, all ceased to stir. The meat which was cooking ceased to fizzle, and the cook, at the instant of pulling the hair of the kitchen boy, lost his hold and began to snore too. The wind also fell entirely, and not a leaf rustled on the trees round the castle. Now around the palace a thick hedge of briars began growing, which every year grew higher and higher, till the castle was quite hid from view, so that no one could not even see the flag upon the tower. Then there went a legend through the land of the beautiful maiden Briar Rose, for so was the sleeping princess named. And from time to time princes came endeavoring to penetrate through the hedge into the castle, but it was not possible, for the thorns held them as if by hands, and the youths were unable to release themselves, and so perished miserably. After the lapse of many years, there came another king's son into the country, and heard an old man tell the legend of the hedge of briars, how that behind it stood a castle where slept a wondrously beauteous princess called Briar Rose, who had slumbered nearly 100 years, and with her the queen and king and all their court. The old man further related what he had heard from his grandfather, that many princes had come and tried to penetrate the hedge, and had died a miserable death. But the youth was not to be daunted, and however much the old man tried to dissuade him, he would not listen, but cried out, "I fear not, I will see this hedge of briars." Just at that time, the last day of the 100 years, when Briar Rose was to wake again, as the young prince approached the hedge, the thorns turned to fine large flowers, which of their own accord made a way for him to pass through, and again closed up behind him. In the courtyard he saw the horses and dogs lying fast asleep, and on the eaves were the doves with their heads beneath their wings. As soon as he went into the house, there were the flies asleep upon the wall. The cook still stood with his hand on the hair of the kitchen boy, the maid at the board with the unplucked fowl in her hand. He went on, and in the hall he found the courtiers lying asleep, and above, by the throne, were the king and queen. He went on further, and all was so quiet that he could hear himself breathe, and at last he came to the tower and opened the door of the little room where slept Briar Rose. There she lay, looking so beautiful that he could not turn away his eyes, and he bent over her and kissed her. Just as he did so, she opened her eyes, awoke, and greeted him with smiles. Then they went down together, and immediately the king and queen awoke, and the whole court and all stared at each other wondrously. Now the horses in the stable got up and shook themselves. The dogs wagged their tails. The doves upon the eaves drew their heads from under their wings, looked around, and flew away. The flies upon the walls began to crawl, the fire to burn brightly, and to cook the meat. The meat began again to fizzle. The cook gave his lad a box upon the ear, which made him call out, and the maid began to pluck the fowl furiously. The whole palace was once more in motion, as if nothing had occurred, for the 100 years' sleep had made no change in anyone. By and by, the wedding of the prince with Briar Rose was celebrated with great splendor, and to the end of their lives they lived happily and contented. Thus ends Briar Rose. Also called Sleeping Beauty. Yes, there are no sharp parts on a spindle. unless you specifically sharpen it. But someone who has never seen a spindle before, might mistake it. This next story is entitled King Thrushbeard. A thrush being a type of bird. It's kind of weird. But interesting. So let us begin. King Thrushbeard by the brothers Grimm. A certain king had a daughter who was beautiful above all belief, but withal so proud and haughty that no suitor was good enough for her. And she not only turned back everyone who came, but also made game of them all. Once the king proclaimed a great festival, and invited thereto from far and near all the marriageable young men. When they arrived, they were all set in a row, according to their rank and standing. First the kings, then the princes, the dukes, the marquises, the earls, and at last of all, the barons. Then the king's daughter was led down the rows, but she found something to make game in all. One was too fat. "The wine tub," said she. Another was too tall. "Long and lanky, has no grace," she remarked. A third was too short and fat. "Too stout to have any wits," said she. A fourth was too pale. "Like death himself," was her remark. And a fifth, who had a great deal of color, she called a cockatoo. The sixth was not straight enough, and him she called a green log scorched in the oven. And so she went on, nicknaming every one of the suitors. But she made particularly merry with a good young king, whose chin had grown rather crooked. "Ha ha!" laughed she. "He has a chin like a thrush's beak." And after that day he went by the name of Thrushbeard. The old king, however, when he saw that his daughter did nothing but mock at and make sport of all the suitors who were collected, became very angry, and swore that she should take the first decent beggar for a husband who came to the gate. A couple of days after this, a player came beneath the windows to sing and earn some bounty if he could. As soon as the king saw him, he ordered him to be called up, and presently he came into the room in all his dirty, ragged clothes, and sang before the king and princess. And when he had finished, he begged for a slight recompense. The king said, "Thy song has pleased me so much that I will give thee my daughter for a wife." The princess was terribly frightened, but the king said, "I have taken an oath and mean to perform it, that I will give you to the first beggar." All her remonstrances were in vain. The priest was called, and the princess was married in earnest to the player. When the ceremony was performed, the king said, "Now it cannot be suffered that you should stop here with your husband, in my house. No, you must travel about the country with him." So the beggarman led her away with him, and she was forced to trudge along with him on foot. As they came to a large forest, she asked, "To whom belongs this beautiful wood?" The echo replied, King Thrushbeard the Good. Had you taken him, so was it thine.
Ah, silly, said she.
What a lot has been mine. I happily married King Thrushbeard.
Next they came to a meadow, and she asked, To whom belongs this meadow so green?
To King Thrushbeard, was again the reply.
Then they came to a great city, and she asked, To whom does this beautiful town belong?
To King Thrushbeard, said one.
Ah, what a simpleton was I that I did not marry him when I had the chance, exclaimed the poor princess.
Come, broke in the player.
It does not please me. I can tell you that you are always wishing for another husband. Am I not good enough for you?
By and by they came to a very small hut, and she said,
Ah, heavens, to whom can this miserable, wretched hovel belong?
The player replied, That is my house, where we shall live together. The princess was obliged to stoop to get in at the door, and when she was inside, she asked,
Where are the servants?
What servants? Exclaimed her husband. You must yourself do all that you want done. Now make a fire and put on some water, that you may cook my dinner, for I am quite tired. The princess, however, understood nothing about making fires or cooking, and the beggar had to set to work himself, and as soon as they had finished their scanty meal, they went to bed. In the morning the husband woke up his wife very early, that she might set the house to rights, and for a couple of days they lived on in this way, and made an end of their store. Then the husband said, Wife, we must now not go on in this way any longer, stopping here, doing nothing. You must have some baskets. You must weave some baskets. So he went out and cut some oysters and brought them home. But when his wife attempted to bend them, the hard twigs wounded her hands and made them bleed. I see that won't suit, said her husband. You had better spin. Perhaps that will do better. So she sat down to spin. The harsh thread cut her tender fingers very badly, so that the blood flowed freely. Do you see, said the husband, how you are spoiling your work? I make a bad bargain in taking you. Now I must try to make a business in pots and earthen vessels. You shall sit in the market and sell them.
Oh, if anybody out of my father's dominions should come and see me in the market selling earthenware, thought the princess to herself, how they will laugh at me.
However, all her excuses were in vain. She must either do that or die with hunger. The first time all went well, for the people bought of the princess, because she was so pretty-looking, and not only gave her what she asked, but some even laid down their money and left the pots behind. On her earnings this day they lived for some time, as long as they lasted, and then the husband purchased a fresh stock of pots. With these she placed her stall at a corner of the market, offering them for sale. All at once a drunken hussar came plunging down the street on his horse, and rode right into the midst of her earthenware, and shattered it into 1,000 pieces. The accident, as well it might, set her a-weeping, and in her trouble, not knowing what to do, she ran home crying,
Ah, what will become of me? What will my good man say?
When she had told her husband, he cried out, Whoever would have thought of sitting at the corner of the market to sell earthenware? But well, I see you are not accustomed to any ordinary work.
There, leave off crying. I have been to the king's palace, and asked if they were not in want of a kitchen maid, that they have agreed to take you, and there you will live free of cost." Now the princess became a kitchen maid, and was obliged to do as the cook bade her, and wash up the dirty things. Then she put a jar into each of her pockets, and in them she took home what was left of what fell to her share of the good things, and of these she and her husband made their meals. Not many days afterward, it happened that the wedding of the king's eldest son was to be celebrated, and the poor wife placed herself near the door of the saloon to look on. As the lamps were lit, and guests more and more beautiful entered the room, and all dressed most sumptuously, she reflected on her fate with a saddened heart, and repented of the pride and haughtiness which had so humiliated and impoverished her. Every now and then the servants threw her out of the dishes morsels of rich delicacies which they carried in, and whose fragrant smells increased her regret, and these pieces she put into her pockets to carry home. Presently the king entered, clothed in silk and velvet, and having a golden chain round his neck. As soon as he saw the beautiful maiden standing at the door, he seized her by the hand, and would dance with her. But she, terribly frightened, refused, for she saw it was King Thrushbeard who had wooed her, and whom she had laughed at. Her struggles were of no avail. He drew her into the ballroom, and there tore off the band to which the pots were attached, so that they fell down and the soup ran over the floor, while the pieces of meat and seed slipped all about in all directions. When the fine folks saw this sight, they burst into one universal shout of laughter and derision, and the poor girl was so ashamed that she wished herself 1,000 fathoms below the earth. She ran out at the door and would have escaped, but on the steps she met a man, who took her back, and when she looked at him, lo, it was King Thrushbeard again. He spake kindly to her, and said, "Be not afraid. I am the musician who dwelt with you in the wretched hut. Our one, for love of you, I have acted thus. And the hussar who rode in among the pots was also myself. All this has taken place in order to humble your haughty disposition, and to punish you for your pride, which led you to mock me." At these words she wept bitterly, and said, "I am not worthy to be your wife. I have done you so great a wrong." But he replied, "Those evil days are past. We will now celebrate our marriage." Immediately after came the bridesmaids, and put on her the most magnificent dresses, and then her father and his whole court arrived, and wished her happiness on her wedding day, and now commenced her true joy as queen of the country of King Thrushbeard. Thus ends King Thrushbeard. This next story is entitled The 12 Hunters. So let us change that title. So let us begin. The 12 Hunters by the brothers Grimm. A certain king's son, unknown to his father,
was betrothed to a maiden whom he loved very much. And once, while he was sitting by her side, happy and contented, news came that his father was very ill and desired to see him before his end. So the prince said to his beloved, "I must go away and leave you. I will give you this ring for a memorial. When I become king, I will return and take you home with me." So saying, he rode off, and when he arrived, he found his father at the point of death. The old king said to him, "My dearest son, I have desired to see you once more before I died, that I may have your promise to marry according to my wishes." And he named to him a certain princess whom he was to make his bride. The young king was so grieved that he did not know what he was saying, and so promised his father that he would fulfill his wish. Soon afterward, the old king closed his eyes in death. When the time of mourning for the late king was over, the young prince, who had succeeded to the throne, was called upon to fulfill the promise which he had given to his father, and the princess was betrothed to him accordingly. By chance the maiden heard of this, and grieved so much about the faithlessness of her beloved that she fast faded away. Then her father said to her, "My dear child, why are you sad? Whatever you wish for, you shall have." For a few moments she considered, but at last she said, "Dear father, I wish for 11 maidens exactly like myself in figure and stature." Her father told her that if it were possible, her wish should be carried out, and he ordered a search to be made in his country until 11 maidens were found resembling exactly his daughter in figure and stature. When they came to the maiden, she said, 12 hunters' dresses made all exactly alike, and each of the maidens had to put on one, while she herself drew on the 12th. Thereupon she took leave of her father and rode away with her companions to the court of her former betrothed, whom she loved so much. There she inquired if he needed any huntsmen, and if he would not take them all into his service. The king looked at her without recognizing her, and as they were such handsome people, he consented to take them, and so they became the 12 royal huntsmen. The king, however, possessed a lion who was such a wonderful beast that he knew all hidden and secret affairs. So one evening he said to the king, "Do you suppose that you have got 12 huntsmen?" "Yes," replied he, 12 huntsmen." "You are mistaken there," replied the lion. "They are 12 maidens." "That can never be true," said the king. "How will you prove it to me?" "Order some peas to be strewn in your anteroom," said the lion, "and you will at once see, for men have a firm tread when walking on peas, and do not slip, but maidens trip and stumble and slide and make the peas roll about." This advice pleased the king, and he ordered peas to be strewn. Now there was a servant of the king's who was kind to the huntsmen, and, as he heard that they were to be put to this trial, he went and told them all that had passed, and that the lion wished to show the king that they were maidens.
The maiden thanked him and told her companions to compel themselves to tread firmly on the peas. When, therefore, the next morning, the king summoned the 12 hunters, and they came into the anteroom, they trod firmly upon the peas with so sturdy a step that not one rolled or moved in the least. Afterwards, when they had left the room, the king said to the lion, "You have deceived me. They walk like men." The lion replied, "They knew that they were to be put to the proof, and so summoned all their strength. Let 12 spinning wheels be now brought into the anteroom, and when they come to pass them, they will be pleased at the sight thereof, as no man would be." This advice also pleased the king, and he caused the 12 spinning wheels to be placed in the room. But the servant, who was kind to the hunters, went and disclosed the plan to the maiden, who instructed her 11 attendants to take no notice whatever of the spinning wheels. The following morning the king summoned his hunters, and they passed through the anteroom without once looking round at the spinning wheels. So the king said to the lion again, "You have deceived me. These are men, for they have not noticed the wheels." The lion replied as before, "They knew that they should be put on trial, and they have behaved accordingly." But the king would believe the lion no more. After this, the 12 hunters followed the king customarily in his sporting, and the longer he had them, the more he seemed to like them. Now it happened that once, as they were going out to the hunt, news came that the princess, who had been betrothed to the young king, was on her way to his court. As soon as the true betrothed heard this, she was so much overcome that all her strength forsook her, and she fell heavily to the ground. The king soon perceived that something had happened to his best huntsman, and ran up to help him just as his glove was drawn off. He then saw upon one finger the ring which he had given to his first love, and, as he looked in the face of the supposed huntsman, he recognized her. At this sight his heart was so touched that he kissed her, and, as she opened her eyes, he said, "You are mine, and I am thine, and no power on earth shall make it otherwise." The king then sent a messenger to the princess, begging her to return to her own country, for he had already a bride. Soon afterwards the wedding was celebrated, and the lion came again into favor, because, after all, he had spoken the truth. Thus ends the 12 Hunters. This, that's kind of interesting. I never expected, him to just say, "Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm going to agree to, having these, 3 or 12 men. Yeah, huntswomen, the huntresses, who also have to be careful for sharp edges on spinning wheels, strewn about the room, 12 of them for some reason." As they come into the antechamber and say, "Oh my goodness, there's 12 spinning wheels. We should all sit at one." I know Suzu's mom would probably, do that. Or no sharp edges. But the brothers Grimm say so. That would snag the thread. Not if it's at the very, very top of the spindle. I've seen a spindle being used. Yeah, well, it's not a top spindle. This next story is entitled, Who Said That These Spindles Were Drop Spindles? Nobody said that. This next story is a really, really famous one, which you all should recognize. There we go. Much better movie in the 1930s than recently. But a very classic tale of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So let us begin. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs by the Brothers Grimm. Once upon a time, in the depth of winter, when the flakes of snow were falling like feathers from the clouds, a queen sat at her palace window, which had an ebony black frame, stitching her husband's shirts. While she was thus engaged and looking out at the snow, she pricked her finger, and 3 drops of blood fell upon the snow. Because the red looked so well upon the white, she thought to herself, had I now but a child as white as this snow, as red as this blood, and as black as the wood of this frame. Soon afterwards, a little daughter was born to her, who was as white as snow, and red as blood, and with hair as black as ebony. And thence she was named Snow White. And when the child was born, the mother died. About a year afterwards, the king married another wife, who was very beautiful, but so proud and haughty that she could not bear any one to be better looking than herself. She possessed a wonderful mirror, and when she stepped before it and said, "O mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" it replied, "Thou art the fairest, Lady Queen." Then she was pleased, for she knew that the mirror spoke truly. Little Snow White, however, grew up and became pretty and prettier, and when she was 7 years old, her complexion was as clear as the noonday, and more beautiful than the queen herself. When the queen now asked the mirror, "O mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" it replied, "Thou wert the fairest, Lady Queen. Snow White is fairest now, I ween." This answer so frightened the queen that she became quite yellow with envy. From that hour, whenever she perceived Snow White, her heart was hardened against her, and she hated the maiden. Her envy and jealousy increased, so that she had no rest day or night. And she said to her huntsman, "Take the child away into the forest. I will never look upon her again. You must kill her and bring me her heart and tongue for a token." The huntsman listened and took the maiden away. But when he drew out his knife to kill her, she began to cry, saying, "Oh, dear huntsman, give me my life. I will run into the wild forest and never come home again." This speech softened the hunter's heart, and her beauty so touched him that he had pity over her and said, "Well,
Run away, then, poor child. But he thought to himself, the wild beasts will soon devour you. Still he felt as if a stone had been taken from his heart, because her death was not by his hand. Just at that moment, a young boar came running along to the spot, and as soon as he clapped eyes upon it, the huntsman caught it and killing it, took its tongue and heart, and carried them to the queen for a token of his deed. But now the poor little Snow White was left motherless and alone, and, overcome with grief, she was bewildered at the sight of so many trees, and knew not which way to turn. Presently she set off running, and ran over stones and through thorns, and wild beasts sprang up as she passed them, but they did her no harm. She ran on until her feet refused to go further, and as it was getting dark, she saw a little house near. She entered it to rest. In this cottage everything was very small, but more neat and elegant than I can tell you. In the middle stood a little table with a white cloth over it, and 7 little plates upon it, each plate having a spoon and a knife and a fork. And there were also 7 little mugs. Against the wall were 7 little beds, ranged in a row, each covered with snow-white sheets. Little Snow White, being both hungry and thirsty, ate a little morsel of porridge out of each plate, and drank a drop or 2 of wine out of each glass, for she did not wish to take away the whole share of any one. After that, because she was so tired, she laid herself down on one bed, but it did not suit. She tried another, but that was too long. A 4th was too short, a 5th too hard, but the 7th was just the thing, and tucking herself up in it, she went to sleep, first commending herself to God. When it became quite dark, the lords of the cottage came home. 7 dwarves, who dug and delved for ore in the mountains. They first lighted 7 little lamps, and perceived at once, for they illuminated the whole apartment, that somebody had been in, for everything was not in the order in which they had left it. The first asked, "Who has been sitting in my chair?" The second, "Who has been eating off my plate?" The third said, "Who has been nibbling at my bread?" The fourth, "Who has been at my porridge?" The fifth, "Who has been meddling with my fork?" The sixth grumbled out, "Who has been cutting with my knife?" The seventh said, "Who has been drinking out of my glass?" Then the first, looking round, began again, "Who has been lying on my bed?" he asked, for he saw that the sheets were tumbled. At these words the others came, and looking at their beds, cried out too, "Someone has been lying in our beds!" But the 7th little man, running up to his, saw Snow White sleeping in it. So he called to his companions, who shouted with wonder, and held up their 7 torches, so that the light fell upon the maiden. "Oh heavens, oh heavens!" said they. "What a beauty she is!" And they were so much delighted that they would not awaken her, but left her to her repose, and the 7th dwarf, in whose bed she was, slept with each of his fellows 1 hour, and so passed the night. As soon as morning dawned, Snow White awoke, and was quite frightened when she saw the 7 little men, but they were very friendly, and asked her what she was called.
My name is Snow White, was her reply. Why have you entered our cottage? They asked. Then she told them how her stepmother would have had her killed, but the huntsman had spared her life, and how she had wandered about the whole day until at last she had found their house. When her tale was finished, the dwarves said, Will you see after our household? Be our cook. Make our beds. Wash, sew, and knit for us, and keep everything in neat order. If so, we will keep you here, and you shall want for nothing. And Snow White answered, Yes, with all my heart and will. And so she remained with them, and kept their house in order. In the mornings the dwarves went into the mountains, and searched for ore and gold. And in the evenings they came home, and found their meals ready for them. During the day the maiden was left alone, and therefore the good dwarves warned her, and said, Be careful of your stepmother, who will soon know of your being here. Therefore let nobody enter the cottage. The queen, meanwhile, supposing she had eaten the heart and tongue of her daughter-in-law, did not think but that she was above all comparison the most beautiful of everyone around. One day she stepped before her mirror and said, O mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all? Thou wert the fairest, Lady Queen. Snow White is fairest now, I ween. Amid the forest darkly green, she lives with dwarves, the hills between. This reply frightened her, for she knew that the mirror spoke the truth, and she perceived that the huntsman had deceived her, and that Snow White was still alive. Now she thought and thought how she should accomplish her purpose, for so long as she was not the fairest in the whole country, jealousy left her no rest. At last a thought struck her, and she dyed her face and clothed herself as a peddler woman, so that no one could recognize her. In this disguise she went over the 7 hills to the 7 dwarves, knocked at the door of the hut, and called out, Fine goods for sale, beautiful goods for sale. Snow White peeped out of the window and said, Good day, my good woman. What have you to sell? Fine goods, beautiful goods, she replied. Stays of all colors. And she held up a pair which was made of variegated silks. I may let in this honest woman, thought Snow White, and she unbolted the door and bargained for 1 pair of stays. Stays being stiffened strips used in a corset. You can't think, my dear, how it becomes you, exclaimed the old woman. Come, let me lace it up for you. Snow White suspected nothing, and let her do as she wished, but the old woman laced her up so quickly and so tightly that all her breath went, and she fell down like one dead. Now, thought the old woman to herself, hastening away, now am I once more the most beautiful of all. Not long after her departure, at eventide, the 7 dwarves came home, and were much frightened at seeing their dear little maid lying on the ground, and neither moving nor breathing, as if she were dead. They raised her up, and when they saw she was laced too tight, they cut the strays in pieces, and presently she began to breathe again, and by and little she revived. When the dwarves now heard what had taken place, they said, "The old peddler woman was no other than your wicked mother-in-law. Take more care of yourself, and let no one enter when we are not with you." Meanwhile, the old queen had reached home, and, going before her mirror, she repeated her usual words. "O mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of us all?" And it replied as before, "Thou wert the fairest, Lady Queen. Snow White is fairest now, I ween. Amid the forest darkly green, she lives with dwarves, the hills between." As soon as it had finished, all her blood rushed to her heart, for she was so frightened to hear that Snow White was yet living. "But now," she thought to herself, "will I contrive something which shall destroy her completely." Thus saying, she made a poisoned comb, by arts which she understood, and then, disguising herself, she took the form of an old widow. She went over the 7 hills to the house of the 7 dwarves, and, knocking at the door, called out, "Good wares to sell today." Snow White peeped out and said, "You mustn't go further, for I dare not let you in." "But still you may look," said the old woman, drawing out her poisoned comb and holding it up. The sight of this pleased the maiden so much that she allowed herself to be persuaded and opened the door. As soon as she had made a purchase, the old woman said, "Now let me for once comb you properly." And Snow White consented. But scarcely was the comb drawn through the hair when the poison began to work, and the maiden soon fell down quite senseless. "You pattern of beauty," cried the wicked old queen, "is now all over with you." And so saying, she departed. Fortunately, evening soon came, and the 7 dwarves returned, and as soon as they saw Snow White lying, like dead, upon the ground, they suspected the old queen, and soon discovering the poisoned comb, they immediately drew it out, and the maiden very soon revived and related all that had happened. Then they warned her again against the wicked stepmother, and bade her to open the door to nobody. Meanwhile, the queen, on her arrival home, had again consulted her mirror, and received the same answer as twice before. This made her tremble and foam with rage and jealousy, and she swore Snow White should die if it cost her her own life. Thereupon she went into an inner secret chamber where no one could enter, and there made an apple of the most deep and subtle poison. Outwardly it looked nice enough, and had rosy cheeks, which would make the mouth of everyone who looked at it water. But whoever ate the smallest piece of it would surely die. As soon as the apple was ready, the old woman again dyed her face, and clothed herself like a peasant's wife. And then, over the 7 mountains to the 7 dwarves, she made her way. She knocked at the door, and Snow White stretched out her head and said, "I dare not let anyone enter. The 7 dwarves have forbidden me." "That is hard for me," said the old woman, "for I must take back my apples, but there is no one which I will give you." "No," answered Snow White, No, I dare not take it.
What? Are you afraid of it? Cried the old woman. There, see, I will cut the apple in halves. Do you eat the red cheeks, and I will eat the core.
The apple was so artfully made that the red cheeks alone were poisoned. Snow White very much wished for the beautiful apple, and when she saw the woman eating the core, she could no longer resist, but, stretching out her hand, took the poisoned part. Scarcely had she placed a piece in her mouth when she fell down dead on the ground. Then the queen, looking at her with glittering eyes and laughing bitterly, exclaimed,
White as snow, red as blood, black as ebony, this time the dwarves cannot reawaken you.
When she reached home and consulted her mirror,
O mirror, mirror on the wall, who is fairest of us all?
It answered, Thou art the fairest, Lady Queen. Then her envious heart was at rest, as peacefully as an envious heart can rest. When the little dwarves returned home in the evening, they found Snow White lying on the ground, and there appeared to be no life in her body. She seemed to be quite dead. They raised her up and searched if they could find anything poisonous, unlaced her, and even uncombed her hair, and washed her with water and with wine, but nothing availed. The dear child was really and truly dead. Then they laid her upon a bier, and all and all seven placed themselves around it, and wept for 3 days without ceasing. Afterwards they would bury her, but she looked still fresh and lifelike, and even her red cheeks had not deserted her. So they said to one another, We cannot bury her in the black ground. And they ordered a case to be made of transparent glass. In this one could view the body on all sides, and the dwarfs wrote her name with golden letters upon the glass, saying that she was a king's daughter. Now they placed the glass case upon a ledge of a rock, and one of them always remained by it watching. Even the beasts bewailed at the loss of Snow White. First came an owl, then a raven, and at last of all a dove. For a long time Snow White lay peacefully in her case, and changed not, but looked as if she were only asleep, for she was still white as snow, red as blood, and black-haired as ebony. By and by it happened that a king's son was travelling in the forest, and came to the dwarf's house to pass the night. He soon perceived the glass case upon the rock, and the beautiful maiden lying within, and he read also the golden inscription. When he had examined it, he said to the dwarves, Let me have this case, and I will pay you what you like for it. But the dwarves replied, We will not sell it for all the gold in the world. Then give it to me, said the prince, for I cannot live without Snow White. I will honor and protect her so long as I live. When the dwarves saw he was so much in earnest, they pitied him, and at last gave him the case, and the prince ordered it to be carried away on the shoulders of one of his attendants. Presently it happened that they stumbled over a rut, and with the shock the piece of poisoned apple which lay in Snow White's mouth fell out.
Very soon she opened her eyes, and raising the lid of the glass case, she rose up and asked, "Where am I?" Full of joy, the prince answered, "You are safe with me." And he related to her what she had suffered, and how he would rather have her than any other for his wife. And he asked her to accompany him home to the castle of the king, his father. Snow White consented, and when they arrived there, the wedding between them was celebrated as speedily as possible, with all the splendor and magnificence proportionate to the happy event. By chance, the old mother-in-law of Snow White was also invited to the wedding, and when she was dressed in all her finery to go, she first stepped in front of the mirror and asked, "O mirror, mirror on the wall, who is fairest of us all?" And it replied, "Thou wert the fairest, O Lady Queen. The prince's bride is more fair, I ween." At these words the old queen was in a fury, and was so terribly mortified that she knew not what to do with herself. At first she resolved not to go to the wedding, but she could not resist the wish for a sight of the young woman, of the young queen. And as soon as she entered, she recognized Snow White, and was so terrified with rage and astonishment that she remained rooted to the ground. Just then a pair of red-hot iron shoes were brought in with a pair of tongs and set before her, and these she was forced to put on and to dance in them till she fell down dead. And thus ends Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. A little bit different than the Disney ending. Just a little bit. But with that chat, we are going to call it for the evening on that most famous story. I do want to thank you all for coming out. We are going to find somebody to raid into. So let us see whomst is available. Oh, my friend Asher is having her birthday stream. Oh, we are totally going to raid into her. So, again, I want to thank you for coming out and listening to me tell you a couple of stories. And I will see you next time, which will probably be Monday. Goodbye for now.